Well, hello guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the next project on the channel, the Boomerang Ranger aircraft. We've had this in for a while and we're finally ready to start this thing. I know there's lots of people that are excited, so hang tight and we'll dive in to this aircraft. All right guys, so as I like to start most of my builds, we are going to talk about the equipment that's going in this aircraft first. So it's going to be a pretty simple rundown. These aircraft from Boomerang Jets are quite simple, nice, good quality aircraft. I'll put a link down below if you haven't seen the unboxing video, but in the unboxing video, we covered all of the stuff that came with the aircraft. So what we're going to talk about first in this build video is the equipment going in this aircraft. So let's bring that camera in closer and we'll take a look. All right, so I just pulled everything out of the box. Now we're building this aircraft as a turnkey aircraft. So that's why we've got a radio here, we've got an overflow tank. So those are all good things that we will be adding to this aircraft. So the first thing we have is a lighting setup from Sky Candy landing lights. So this kit, they actually make a Boomerang Ranger kit, which includes the two nose cones. We ordered the nav lights, and it includes a bunch of the nav light covers there as well too. So that's kind of a sweet little setup. And then of course our lights, which actually go in the tips. So that is the lighting kit that's getting installed. Now with the Sky Candy lights, keep in mind that these are to be run only on 4 to 6 volts only. It says right in the middle of the writing there. So not 6.6, not 7 volts, 6 volts. So you need to keep that in mind. You either need to run a regulator with the lighting setup, Castle Creations BEC, or a battery with a low enough voltage. Does not do these lights any good if they are too high of a voltage setup. So keep that in mind, please. So our radio we're using with this aircraft, we'll pull it out here and take a quick look at it. So the owner of the aircraft, Jürgen, he wanted a new radio, so we got the JR T14 radio. Now this is the higher end version of this radio, so this has the high-end gimbals that the 28X has, and so it's all the CNC gimbals, so absolutely outstanding resolution and gimbals on this aircraft. It's 14 channels. With the X-Bus setup, you can basically set this up so many different ways. So it's a pretty awesome, awesome radio that is very, very adjustable. Now, of course, because we're using a JR radio, we have a JR receiver. Now, this is the 11 BPX Pro, which is a pretty slick setup. Like this thing a lot. So it is a 11 channel receiver. You can set it up as PWM or X-Bus on the outputs, which is 11 channels. It's nice because it's a little bit smaller than their bigger ones, and it's got a better power setup than the smaller standard receivers. So it does come with 2 of the sub receivers, or some people refer to these as satellites. So it's got some great setups on the receiver. So really slick. This is actually the first time I'll be using this receiver. It's fairly new in the JR lineup. We've got a bunch of servo horns here to use on the aircraft. So basically we've gone with 1-inch servo horns throughout and a set of the super servo horns, the nylon ones. Now most of our servos on this aircraft are going to be the 8411 competition servos. Now these are a phenomenal servo for this size of aircraft. Great specs on this servo as well too. So it is X-Bus, it is very programmable and a great all-around servo. Aluminum top case to it. So yeah, awesome servo that we're going to be using for most of the surfaces. Now we do also need some other servos on this aircraft, so we've gone with an S3411, which is basically the same thing as the servo I just showed you, but this is the smaller servo, the mini case servos. And then finally, we have two of the S1855 2K X-Bus servos. Again, awesome little servo. These are the thin wing servos which you need, I think, for the elevators. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what they're going to be used for. So we've got two of those guys as well too. So that's the control surface behind this aircraft. And of course, because the lighter side of RC is a Swiwin dealer, we are putting in a Swiwin turbine into this aircraft. So we're going to be installing a Swiwin 120 engine in this aircraft. Now, this is definitely the upper size of what you should install in this aircraft. So let's talk about that quickly for a minute. I know there's going to be a lot of regular viewers that watch this video, and there's going to be a lot of people that are just getting into jet aircraft that are going to be watching this video as well too. So why am I putting a 120 engine in this aircraft? Well, in my area, we're 3,000 feet above sea level. We lose about 15 to 20% of our thrust on our engine. So a 120 kind of operates like a 90 at sea level. So that's why I always upsize my engines, but I've always upsized engines too because it's nice to have the power when you need it. So you got to remember that we have throttle sticks. The throttle sticks are designed to be used. You can also turn down the max RPM on the turbine and down thrust it if you need to. So if you find that the turbine is just too powerful, which that's what the throttle stick is for, adjust it. So I'm always a bit of a fan of upsizing the turbine. Planes definitely don't need it, but in my opinion, it's always a good idea. So this plane would do very well with a Swiwin 80 as well too. It would be a great engine for this, not necessarily for our elevation. So an 80 would fly it, but it would be a bit of a dog to fly because you're basically dropping about 20% off the thrust of the engine. So it would almost be like flying the plane with a 60 at our elevation. So just some stuff to think about, but let's talk a little bit about the manual. So I'm going to be building this aircraft with the instruction manual that you can download and print off the internet. Now I'm going to follow the instruction manual as closely as I can. So the reason for that is there's going to be a lot of people that are building the Ranger that are watching this video, and I just want to go through the instructions like they're suggesting and like they're laying it out. And if I have any changes, I'll definitely talk about that, of course, as we always do, and we'll make sure those changes happen. So that's what our plan is with the manual. So that is basically the intro to the Ranger build, guys. It's going to be a fun build. I think it should be a quick build as well too. Obviously, we've got the F-14 in progress as well too, but we'll be able to kind of plug away at the Ranger here and there and get some stuff done. So thanks for joining me on the journey with the Ranger. If you're building one of these things and this is your first turbine jet, or if you are a seasoned veteran and you're watching this video and building one of these aircraft, looks like it's a ton of fun. Really cool aircraft. So anyways, let's dive into the build of the Boomerang Ranger. All right, so basically the first step on an aircraft like this, in my opinion, before we even get into the manuals, we need to set up the radio and the aircraft on the new radio. So I'm basically going through the radio here and getting everything set up. So we've got a couple different options with this, this receiver setup. So We are, of course, limited to 11 channels. Now, we could have gone with the larger setup, the 11 BPX, or sorry, the 16 BPX Pro, but in that case, you still have the same number of channels, but you've got all the X-bus outputs. So that would have been a little bit more open, but of course it's more money, and also it's basically double the size of this guy. So the little Ranger really doesn't need that bigger box. That's why we went this route. So we just have to basically look at the way this is laid out and decide whether or how we're actually going to make this work. So basically, here's all of our channels. So this is my normal process with an aircraft like this. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 channels, and we've got 11 outputs. So obviously that's not going to work, right? Now, we've got a couple different options with this receiver. Probably the easiest option is if we run all of these servos off of the X-bus setup. So really that doesn't mean a whole lot to most people unless you're using JR equipment. But basically what that means is the throttle, the brakes, the lights, and the gear all have to be run off PWM signal. So if we have every single one of these outputs on X-bus, these outputs won't work. All the servo outputs will work. So what we can do in this case is we can set this up as an X-bus on all the outputs. This 11 BPX Pro actually comes with a converter. So this plugs into the X-bus channel and converts it to a regular PWM channel, okay? So what we can do is we can use something similar like this. Now, of course, we need to supply these, but basically we can take the 2 of these channels and run a splitter with 2 leads coming off, and those 4 leads on the 2 different splitters can run our throttle, brakes, lights, and gear. And then all of these other items will end up being on the X-bus channel. So basically what that means is we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 channels, and we actually will end up with 1 extra X-bus channel if we do it that way. And this is one of the converters that I was talking about. So fortunately I keep these guys in stock, or at least try to. So this plugs into one of the X-bus outputs and makes 2 PWM outputs. So I'll need to find one more of those. I think I've got it buried in my parts bin, but that is basically what we are going to be using to make this whole system jive perfectly. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going through the radio and just doing all my programming for all the channels. So that's kind of the first step in making all of this stuff work. So I won't bore you with how to do that because that's going to vary depending on your radio, but essentially we need a channel assigned for all of these items here as a first step. Okay guys, so what we've done here is we've got our channel layout all completed, programmed into the radio, and I have just bound the receivers to the radio. Now the JR system is an easy bind setup, so you basically plug in the battery with the receivers plugged in, they start flashing, you put your radio into bind, and that's basically it. So this system is essentially ready to go now, ready to start going ahead with the programming and building of the aircraft. And the one thing I forgot to do was to bind the receiver setup with the plug-in to select the X-bus mode. So X-bus is initiated when there's a green light there. So now all these channels are X-bus servo outputs. Okay, so I'm going to try and keep this fairly simple as possible, just because if you're not using JR, this isn't going to make a lot of sense. But basically, with an X-bus system or a bus system in general, all of these servos come pre-programmed to a throttle servo. So it doesn't matter where I plug this in. I'll plug it into number 7. Okay, but this servo is a throttle servo at the moment. Okay, so all of our servos get programmed to be what we want them to be. So if we want to make this a right aileron servo, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into servo converter, Okay, so right now it's a throttle channel and we want to change that to be not a new sub ID. We want to change it to be a right aileron servo. Okay, so the sub IDs, you can have 4 servos as right aileron servos. So when we hit set, now that is a aileron servo. Okay, and the other cool thing with setting up this plane as an X-bus plane is we can do all of our settings in the X-bus menu. So we can reverse the servo here, we can adjust the neutral, the travel, all of that kind of stuff. Holding, dumping, deadband, boost, alarm level, all that stuff comes with using an X-bus setup. So very, very cool setup. It's going to be very accurate because these servos are just phenomenal. So really looking forward to setting up this aircraft as a X-bus setup. So that's essentially what we're going to do, and we can change these at any time, but this servo is now programmed as a right aileron servo. So when I go through this, what I like to do is go in there and just mark it as a right aileron. So with an RA, now we know that servo has been programmed as number 2, right aileron. All right, so my new build table, I'm quite excited for it. So I've got a bunch of drawers here to keep things organized. So what I've done is I've put all my supplies, electronic parts in the bottom drawer. This drawer I've gone and put all of my little build parts, gear, all the hardware and everything, batteries, servo covers, that kind of stuff, right? So that's it. So it just helps keep things organized. Okay, so first step in the manual is hinging. So we're hinging the aileron and we are hinging the flaps. So our wings are in bags. So let's take these things out of the bags. All right, you know, and kudos to Boomerang for doing such an amazing job on the finish of this aircraft. Now these are covered wings, and I think they have put clear coat on here because the seams and everything between the 2 different coverings are just beautiful. So we didn't take these wings out when we unpacked the aircraft, so good job, Boomerang. Absolutely stellar looking wings. So essentially the hinging is fairly simple. You want to make sure you use copious amounts of glue. Now I used to use Hysol when I did this, and there's really nothing wrong with Hysol. But I've really started liking Gorilla Glue, which is a polyurethane glue. So most people have heard of this stuff. This is the stuff that somebody put in their hair and didn't go so well. Anyways, Gorilla Glue, polyurethane glue, it reacts with moisture. So when you're using this stuff, what you have to do is you have to get one of the surfaces wet. So essentially what you're going to do is you would take the aileron off and basically make sure that you get the wood itself in there wet. Okay, so you're going to put a little bit of water in there, then you're going to put a decent amount of Gorilla Glue in there, then you install your hinge and you do the same thing on the wing side. Now when you're installing these hinges, it's good to put a little bit of a couple drops of oil onto the actual hinge itself, and the benefit of that is when this Gorilla Glue oozes out, it's not going to get sucked into the hinge and prevent that hinge from moving. All right guys, so let's get into hinging this the surfaces on this aircraft. Now I'm going to do all the surfaces at once here, which is a little bit of a deviation from the manual because the manual just goes through the different items, but it's nice just to get all your hinging done at one time. So basically we'll start off with the flap here. What I've done is I've just taken out my hinges, made sure they're nice and flat. Some of them have a little bit of a bend there, so you just take your finger and flatten them out. So that part's done. And what we can do here is making sure we keep everything in the same spot. Just going to spray some. So we get a bit of moisture inside the surface. take our Gorilla Glue, jam some in there. This is where Trusty comes in. Then we take that and get it in there even further. Then we'll just wipe off the excess. And then what we want to do is get some on our hinge itself. Now as this cures, this stuff expands, so just keep that in mind. And then now what we'll do is we'll slip that in. So that is what we're going to be doing to hinge this surface. There we go. So I'm going to do the same thing with the other ones on the surface side, and then we're going to do the same thing on the actual the wing side. Okay, so what I've done now is all the glue is done on this side, or the surface side. So I've gone in here and just made sure that all of our holes line up. All right, so we have put glue in the wing itself, put glue on the dots on our actual surface, and now what we'll do is get this installed on the surface. Now I've focused on getting most of the glue inside the wing, not on the white hinges itself, because if you do that, it just ends up oozing out everywhere. So that's why I focused on getting it in the wing, and then enough moisture on that wood surface to make sure that it expands and cures properly. Now we'll just wipe off our excess. And there we go. So the surface, the flap has plenty of movement, right? We've got lots of movement all the way down on the flap. So we'll just make sure that I check in the manual here and see how much movement we're supposed to get, so we can make sure we get that. But now what we do is just put some masking tape on here to prevent this from moving out, and this surface is good to go. All right, so max flap travel here, we'll just do kind of a rough guide to look at it, is 72 millimeters, which is there. So we've got a decent amount of movement. We'll push those hinges in all the way, go to about 0. Yeah, no problem. So what we want to do with these flap hinges is just make sure they're inset nice and tight, and now we'll put masking tape on the flap. So with these surfaces that move one way, like the flap here, if you pull the flap or actuate the flap, put the tape on it, what happens is as this flap sits down, it actually pulls itself in. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through and do all of the surfaces in the exact same manner. The pin hinges are basically exactly the same situation. The only difference obviously is they can spin in the holes, so you just have to make sure your pivots are lined up, but there's really no choice as far as that goes. So I'm going to continue hinging all of these surfaces. If I encounter anything weird, I'll let you guys know. Okay, so I'm just adjusting the surface here, the aileron surface, and I'm just looking for the right amount of travel. Now this does not make any sense at all. So what they're calling for on aileron travel is 42 millimeters in each direction. That would be absolutely mental. So 42 millimeters on the aileron would be like that much travel. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. I think it's maybe 42 total. So I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna adjust this, like here's 25. That's a lot of travel. So yeah, I'll check in on that, but that doesn't make a lot of sense for travel. So anyways, downwards, you'll get a little bit more than up. So up is stuck where it's at right now unless we move the surface and those hinges pull out a little bit. So that's why I'm adjusting this. So anyways, keep that in mind. The travels in the manual may not be correct. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set my aileron travel to about 30 degrees. Actually, exactly 30 degrees, which I still think is a lot. There we go. So that is that's 30 degrees of travel. So there's full up. So that's a lot of aileron travel. I think it's way too much, but anyways, that gives us the option later on to get more travel if we need it. So, all right, and here is a good example of why I have started using Gorilla Glue on the hinging of aircraft. So if you look there, you can see how the Gorilla Glue has changed from kind of that syrupy consistency and it's turned into foam. So what happens is the polyurethane glue, the Gorilla Glue, reacts with moisture, expands. So what that's going to do is when you put your pin in there or your hinge point, it's going to actually expand into the wood, into the hinge, which is awesome. So both of the wings are done. We've gotten the same amount of travel on the left wing as the first wing or the right wing. So we've got 30 degrees of travel on the ailerons, which again, I think is too much, but we'll figure that out. So anyways, wings are hinged. All right, so everything's nice and cured now on these surfaces we got completed. Now what happens is the glue, the Gorilla Glue, expands, right? And you can see it on the pin here. Basically expands, turns into this really hard foam. And now we've got some that's kind of in the way and preventing our surface from moving. So all we do is take our trusty bent screwdriver or any sort of poking device, and you basically just get rid of the excess glue. All right, so elevators have been hinged. Those are done, or the horizontal stabs. Now I just lined up all of the control horn surfaces here, and they are all exactly the same size, which is good. So basically we've got elevators, because they work in pairs, which is also a nice thing to see on this kit. So we've got elevators, rudder, aileron, aileron, flap, flap. So they're all identical, which is perfect. So it's nice to see double horns like this on the system. So best way to glue these things is to bolt them together first. There's a little spacer here that goes on, and then these things get glued in place. We're not doing that yet. I was just taking a look at it just to kind of check the hardware out. The ball joints there use a 2mm hardware package, which is great because the 1-inch JR aluminum servo horns that we have are also a 2mm hole in them, which is going to be absolutely perfect. So going through the manual here, basically we've hinged all the surfaces now, not necessarily just the aileron and flap, so we've done everything. And now we're going to start to get working on the servo mounting. Check, check, check. All right, and I was just thinking about this as I'm putting this or test fitting this tip tank on. I'm thinking, oh no, are they going to fit in the wing bags, or do we have to make these things like easily removable? And it looks like the bags that you can get from Boomerang for this aircraft. Yes. Good job, Boomerang. Way to design these bags properly. Thank you. All right, so we got our hardware pack pulled out here. Now there's a couple things that I really like about the way this is set up. So number one, the servo cover plates, nice thick G10 material, fiberglass material. The holes are already pre-cut. Now these are also painted as well too. So they've done a great job painting this stuff. And there's a little bit of overspray on here, so we'll just clean those guys up as we go through. But really, really nice servo covers. Quite impressed, quite surprised. And so this is basically what we need for that part. We need the L brackets, and we need the little tiny screws. I'm kind of guessing on the ones we actually need, but anyway, so these are the parts that we're going to be getting ready and prepping for the wing servo installation. So great time in the video to thank each and every one of you that have donated to the Shop Build Fund. Thank you so much for your donations. As your names scroll across the screen here, all of these people have donated to the Shop Build, whether it's been big donations, small donations. Thank you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is so appreciated, so helpful, and it's awesome to see the support come through. So thank you. Okay guys, so I've cleaned up all of our openings and edges on the servo covers. Now there's one important thing here when you're putting these together. So you'll see there's a long side on the brackets. There's a short side on the brackets. Now those hole spacings are the same on the long side and the short side, but you want the short side facing upwards. That's where your servo is going to mount, and you want the long side against the covers. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you are when you're putting these guys together. So all we're going to do in this case is get these in place. There's a fixed spot for them, so there's 0 adjustments, and we're going to use Loctite and get the those L brackets mounted. All right, so covers are done. We've temporarily just placed them on the wings. The reason I did that is to mark them so we know which one's which now. We got left aileron, left flap, right aileron, right flap. Now what we can do is we can get the servos installed on the covers. Nice thing with these covers too is they're all pre-drilled. We've got blind nuts here as well, which is nice to see because the force is on the cover or on this piece here. So it's nice to have a nice solid connection to the wing with those blind nuts. I'm not a fan of blind nuts, but in a situation like this, it's a heck of a lot better than using a tiny little wood screw to hold that in place. So nice to see, and let's install these servos. Okay guys, so during this video, we've already programmed this one as a right aileron servo. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to go in and do our centering and our control surface adjustment on this servo. So basically right now, the servo's plugged in. It's programmed as an aileron servo. So if I use my aileron stick, it is doing what ailerons are supposed to do. So this servo arm doesn't have a perfect center. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to adjust the center point on the servo arm. So I have not put Loctite on that yet, and that's okay, I will do that. So what we do is we go into our X-Bus menu on our radio, and because this is already an aileron servo, what we do is we look at our channel layout. Now right aileron is channel 2. So we've already got our aileron servo all set up here already. Okay, so the first thing we can do is pick our direction. So looking at this, we just take a look at how the aileron servo is sitting in there. So the aileron servo is sitting like this. If we do right aileron, the servo needs to come towards the surface, so the surface goes up on the wing. So right now, we're moving backwards. So all we have to do is reverse the servo. And now, our aileron servo is moving the correct direction. Hit set. That's been programmed on the servo. Next thing we're going to adjust is the centering of the servo. So we just go into our neutral here, which is right there. Now with the X-Bus menu here, you can decide how many points it's being adjusted. So right now it's being adjusted 4 points. So you can knock this down to 1 point. And basically it's going to adjust it very slowly, or we can go to 10 points and adjust it quicker and then fine tune it down a little bit. So what I like to do with these to just get them very accurate is take my straight edge and just use the straight edge on the holes. And all I do is on a lighter colored surface, I just bring the straight edge to the holes and just want that straight edge to touch the edge of the servo holes, and I know they're both basically identical. Now my servo arm's not tight, so I gotta make sure I tighten that up. Just the pinch screw there, so it's actually, I'm getting good measurements. There we go. So now that servo arm is perfectly centered. Now it's important, this last step here, to go and hit set. Now that's been programmed in the servo itself. Now remember, we've got all these other things that we could adjust, travel, things like that, but we are going to leave that alone for this servo. So now, I've kind of touched on this already, but it doesn't matter where we plug this X-Bus servo in. We were just plugged in number 1. If we plug it into number 11, it still is going to operate as the right aileron servo, okay? So that's a pretty slick feature of using X-Bus or a bus system on an aircraft. Really love this stuff. It's pretty slick, and all those things are now saved in the servo itself. All right, guys, and that is everything for this episode of the Boomerang Ranger Build. Thank you so much for watching the build series. If you're building one of these aircraft along with me, good choice on the aircraft, pretty slick, slick unit. So we got a lot done in this video. Next video, obviously, we're going to continue on, and we are going to continue with the wing assembly and just following the manual as it's laid out in the manual. So thanks guys for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and hit that subscribe button down below if you are a new viewer to the channel and you have not subscribed. If you're an old viewer and you still haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button down below. Thanks guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.